So my involvement goes back quite a long time. So I was particularly involved with literacy starting in the early 90s. And that was when I was involved a lot with family literacy programs. I specialized a lot in the teaching of English as a second language, but also very much involved with the adult education programs and looking at literacy practices and processes. So I've been involved in many different ways as a teacher, as a program coordinator, as someone working with curriculum. Currently, I work in the field of international education and international language teaching, a lot involved with the teaching of English as a second language, sometimes to those learners who are lacking first language literacy. So it's an interesting crossover there. But basically, my field's always been the language and literacy field. I always like to do some kind of a needs assessment, obviously. And so often, I think people start to think of needs assessment as to knowledge or what can someone do, what are the literacy skills that are already there, and what do they still need. And certainly that's important. But I find the needs assessment is really important to look at more personal aspects of the learner. We don't know what aspects this person already experienced with school. Did this learner have educational experiences in the past that were not effective, that left that learner feeling fear of school, nervousness, anxiety? So I think it's really important to understand that context because that's the foundation. We also have to understand about the person. What are his or her aspirations? What do we think is really important for them in order to survive? What are the survival literacy skills that really need to be cemented for that student? And also, how is that student going to learn? I think that's a really important one because we all don't learn the same. We have to understand what's circulating around that learner that we have to navigate in order for that person to come to our programs happily and to feel that we're there for them regardless of their context. A lot of time adult learners have to worry about work, have to worry about family members, so we have to make sure that we understand that fully because those are important things to them. And so we have to make sure that we don't feel that that's an obstacle for them to continue their learning process. I think that's all part of the needs assessment in determining what's the content that we're going to work with, what are the interests, so that we can capture them, but also how are they going to be able to learn, and what do we feel is really important for them. Some things might appear the same philosophically, but I think one thing, because I've taught both, has been of interest to me is with young learners, with students of different ages, they haven't had the life experiences yet, whereas adult learners have. And I think it goes back to my ideas about assessment, is understanding where that learner has come from in their educational experiences and how that shaped them today. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's been a negative shaping, and we want it to be a positive one. But with young learners, we have sort of a canvas that's pretty much blank, that we know, and we've sort of defined more ourselves, or a curriculum has defined for us what kind of things are going to be patterned for them on the path to learning. Whereas with adults, I think it's important for us to go back and for us to get them to lead us, for them to articulate to us in whichever way they do that, what it is that they need. As adults, maybe they need help expressing it, but they know what it is that they really need in order to have their own success for the future. So I think being attentive listeners and really making sure that they're partners in the planning and delivery process is really key. That we don't have to feel we're facilitating, but we don't have to feel that we have to make the decisions and lead them on everything. Because as adults, I think we know that we'd like to be involved in a process like that, should we be that person. And I think that's very key. I think all educators struggle with the part where they feel they want to keep moving on their plans with what needs to be done. And sometimes an adult may not show for class or something else throws a curveball in your planning. And I think we have to go with it. Certainly, the struggles that I've had to deal with in the past are when there are absences, which are for good reason. But certainly, you get frustrated because you want to see your plans go forward. So I think for educators is to be understanding that there's a lot of context around that learner. It's a big thing to try to come to school or come back to school and be pursuing literacy. There's all sorts of emotions and context around that. So I think it's important for us to um, really think about what if something frustrates us. Um, we have to think about what's frustrating for the learner first, and maybe think that some of the things that we're frustrated with are really not very important struggles when you look at the long term goals of helping someone with their literacy skills. There are many, many books out there and many suggestions and so on. But to be very honest with you, and again, I had to learn this myself, is I go from their stories. I found that trying to understand their lives, their stories, sometimes provided me with the best content to work with. People can approach print better, I find, when they have more of a personal connection to it. So I find if I can use things that relate to them, to their interests, to their lives, to their aspirations, as much as possible, or at least to be included within something, I find that that's the best content. As I mentioned, I think the idea of someone's personal life in print brings that print closer to the person. So I think one thing I've done before is I've let, and I found this effective for literacy learners, and also when there's an ESL situation to it as well, is having the student, the learner, tell us something, a story about themselves, about their past, about anything. I think it'd be very interesting to even talk about any past school experiences. Um, I would write it all down word for word. In the case of second language learners, even if there was a mistake, I would still do that. I would write it down, and then I would use that print material as the basis for follow up activities. So, for example, this is called the language experience approach, or LEA. And I found that very effective because once a learner sees their words in print, they're going to approach that print with more confidence. It's going to be recognized quicker by them. And I find you could start the different types of linguistic activities easier if it's something about them. It doesn't mean that you just stick to that, but I think it's always a good springboard, or then bringing in something else that relates to what you were just talking about as a follow up. So I think any kind of activity as a follow up that chunks out language, that shows the clarity of it, that shows comprehension, I think is really important. I used to also like to, for example, once I used to do things with recipes where just to get the idea of moving from command form to descriptive form. So sometimes I'd have bulleted items, much more readable, um, easier to approach it instead of just long text. But then I'd ask for those words to be changed into a more descriptive type of writing instead of a command form like recipes are written, so that the genre differences are shown. But then I'd ask them to put it into bubbles with arrows in between in order to show how things follow in a sequence. And so it sounds like something to some people they feel is that very kid-like to start putting all these sort of visuals, but it's important because a lot of students need that visual support. Well, first of all, enjoy it. You will find that it's very, not only is it very worthwhile for everyone involved in this process, but you will find that you'll get a lot of satisfaction from the work that you do. That will be very evident to you. So my advice to you is to stick with it, and to remember to be open to the learners that are in front of you or that you're working with, to consider them peers in the process, to really understand them before crafting out a program that you will craft with them. And also to remember the ideas of flexibility, understanding, and really trying to listen to learners when they identify certain needs that they have, or maybe ways that they feel that they can learn better. Sometimes it's hard for any educators to accept advice, but I think in this field in particular, we have to understand that they know, and that we're there to support them as they pursue their learning path. So good luck to all of you.